So who are you and what do you do?
Well, hey, Mitch, I'm Alan Eagle. I am an executive communications consultant and an author. I am the co-author of the books Trillion Dollar Coach, How Google Works, and our new book, Learned Excellence. I am a Silicon Valley native raised here in Los Altos, California. I spent over 40 years working in the Valley, my first 20 plus years working at a series of startups, five of them. Two were successful, three were failures. So I've lived both sides of that. And then I spent the last 16 years at Google in a variety of executive communications roles.
As I was saying before we hit record, we have a lot of mutual friends, which hopefully will
Yeah.
help us have a more better conversation. I'm sure it will. But also, as I mentioned before we recorded, that I've been a big fan of your writing for all the books through. And I guess the first place to start is it seems like you like working with people named Eric.
Well, I definitely like working with at least the two Erics I've worked with. Yeah. I had just a terrific experience. So my first 5 years at Google, I was the lead kind of speech writer, executive comms person for Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO at the time, and a few other top leaders at Google, Jonathan Rosenberg, who's a close friend of mine and was the head of the product team, and a few others. And so, we all had a lot of fun working together. And then sometime around 2010, 2011 or so, Eric Schmidt had the ideas we ought to write a book about Google management. And then a few years later, when Bill Campbell passed away, Eric came back and said, "Hey, let's write something about Bill." And we realized it was kind of a sequel. Trillion Dollar Coach was kind of a sequel to How Google Works. And so both of those were just a great experience of working with someone I have tremendous respect for, Eric Schmidt, and our other co-author, Jonathan Rosenberg. And then Eric Potterat. Yeah, I guess it's just the smart Erics who are just remarkable people. But he's my co-author for Learn Excellence. Was the lead psychologist for the Navy SEALs, developed their mental toughness curriculum, and then moved on to pretty much do the same thing for the LA Dodgers and thousands of other athletes and executives. Um, and so Mitch, if you know any other Erics who are really fascinating and accomplished, I'd love to write
Yeah.
a book with them. That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Eric is over indexing in terms of greatness and interesting jobs. Just the name in and of itself. We should retire it at this point. It
Uh,
seems like the fair thing to do.
yeah, let's see. I There was a great speed skater, Eric Hayden. Maybe I had to look him up.
Yeah.
Can't
I
think of
think you
anybody
found
else
your
right now.
niche, Alan. Yeah, I think you found your
Yeah.
market here.
Writing books with Eric. Hadn't thought of it that way.
But this new book, Learned Excellence, is so amazing. It's a great read. I'm not just saying that because we're chatting, but there are a lot of books on excellence. There's a lot of books on just leadership and how to be a great leader. And there's a thesis from this book that I don't think is unique. I think other people have probably said the same thing, but it's the people who are saying this and how they're saying it that makes it, to me, extremely unique. I was wondering if we could start off in this world of understanding, one, what does it take for someone like Eric to develop that program? Because it's one thing to talk about the physicality of the Navy SEALs. And as someone who's done a lot of training and work and actually has worked with Navy SEALs in the past, the mental toughness is really where it is. My coach used to always say that a fight is 99% psychological and 1% physical, was the way they would talk about it. And they were close quarter combative experts. And again, I worked with Navy SEALs, Federal Air Marshals, and beyond. And I was curious in thinking about this, that why do businesses look towards things like the Navy SEALs or Olympic champions or athletes in general as either a benchmark or a way that we could attribute it to the work that we do? It seems a bit not synchronous to me.
Yeah, because you think of, I mean, those are performers under high stress situations. Obviously, Navy SEALs or any elite military personnel are going into extremely high stress situations, or athletes before the beginning of a big game, or I don't know, diving off of a 10-meter platform, that's high stress. But one of the insights in the book, and one of the insights that Eric developed over his, 30 plus year career, is that In fact, we all experience those kinds of stress. We are all performers. Think about you're driving in traffic and you have a child in the back seat who starts yelling about something. My God, what a stressful situation, you know? You're at work and you get one of those chats and it's from your boss and it's just, are you there? Question mark. Like, boom, like, uh-oh, what does she want? Like we've all had that. So the insight of the book is that, yes, these are exceptional performers in very high stress situations, but everybody has that. We're all performers. And we all experience stress situations and need a form of mental toughness. And the insight you started talking about mental toughness, and so Eric was 20 years in the Navy. He retired as a commander in 2016, and Eric Potterack, not Eric Schmidt, and
Oh, he's been through
uh,
wars too. Don't fool yourself.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and Eric Potterack was invited to develop the mental toughness curriculum for the Navy SEALs. And so when Eric told me that, I go, what do you mean develop? Didn't they already have one? And no, they didn't. What they had was Hell Week, which is like the middle and the
Bud's
toughest
training.
part
Yeah.
of their training.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of figured like, look, if you can survive Hell Week, you must be mentally tough. But so what he developed was actually a screening test and a curriculum to help more people get through Hell Week, to sort of pre-screen them so that they would not fail out. And interesting. Eric brings up an interesting insight that we have talked a lot about. So Mitch, let me ask you, what is mental toughness?
I believe that mental toughness is the ability to sit in a situation, be extremely present in it, know the actions that need to be taken, and to not allow any history or potential future outcomes influence that moment in time.
Okay, that's good. I mean, of course, you'd have a great answer. I think most people would say grit, perseverance, confidence, poise, cool under pressure. And all of those, including what you just said, are describing an end state. They're describing when you are already mentally tough, here's how you act. They don't describe how to get there.
Oh,
And so that's what Eric developed, and that's what we talk about in the book is how do you learn to be mentally tough? Most people are not born that way. So that's one of the aspects of the book is we teach people how to get there, and there's multiple phases. And it's not just mental toughness, but that's kind of at the heart of it.
yeah.
How do you perform well under pressure?
I want to pull at the thread just a little bit because we started off in this world of why would business leaders feel the attachment to it? And I said, I'm not sure I sense it. So let me explain where I was coming from. And I think it'll pull on this idea, which is if you think about what's happening in those high stake worlds of Navy SEALs or Olympic champions, they're training for a very short moment in time. If you think about it from a business perspective, it's constant and consistent. Now, it might be more like a jagged saw where it's going up and down, and sometimes it's further down and the stress goes higher. But it's this ongoing world that you're in. And I was just thinking that for sure in business, there are moments in time that are make or break. Did you get the client win? Did you not get the client win? But they still seem like they would have to be approached psychologically and even physically from a very different perspective, almost like the way you wouldn't sprint to win a marathon.
Well, yes. I mean, I think when we think of athletes or military, we're thinking of the big event and handling the stress in that moment, which is certainly part of it. But everything those excellent performers do 24/7, the marathon gets them to the point where they are excellent in that moment. A Navy SEAL's excellence isn't just when they're, jumping out of the helicopter and going to work. It's all of the training they put into it. It's everything they do. Same with an athlete. So, I would argue that yes, we do have in everyday life, we have moments of stress, we have moments of performance. And yet the excellence that we want to achieve then is achieved through pretty much everything we do, through all the practices. And that's why we think our book is kind of unique, which is that, maybe there's books about mindsets, maybe there's books about handling stress or mental toughness. we tried to step back and say, look, let's look overall at what are the psychological aspects, the mental aspects of excellence. Let's take a holistic view. And I spent, Eric and I spent dozens of hours talking through how does he approach his clients? What questions does he ask them? How does he sort of break down the whole process? And, so it is the marathon and the sprint, the
Yeah.
sprint at the end, or maybe it's sometime in the middle of the marathon.
No, you're right. There's actually, now that I'm reflecting on this, there's a very well-known Navy SEAL saying that I'm probably going to butcher, which is steady and smooth is fast. That type of idea
Um,
too, that this repetition and doing it really accurately is going to build up this ability to do it almost automatically, which is what the training does too. It prepares them for that situation in a different way. I'm not sure you're
yeah,
agreeing.
isn't it something like steady as smooth, smooth as no,
Smooth is fast. Yeah,
slow as
something like that.
slow as
Yeah.
steady, steady as I don't know, something like
Yeah,
that.
you're right. It's something like that. Those
Yeah,
words are in there in some way, shape, or
yeah,
form. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a really interesting idea. So
yeah.
the other provocation that I think you bring forward in the book is that it is more nurture than nature. And when we think about leadership and we think about excellence in particular, a lot of the commentary would probably be, sure, there's a lot of learned things you can do here, but there's a lot of nature. There's a lot of things that makes that individual capable of doing it that is built into it. It sounds like the book is making an argument that says it's more learned than you might believe.
Certainly the mental component and leadership, of course, is primarily mental. Now, the performers we're talking about in sports or in military are physical specimens. They're fantastic athletes. They're all the physical stuff. I can't learn my way into shooting 3-pointers like Steph Curry. I just can't. The physical assets are not there. The talent is not there. But the point is, all of the mental aspects are learned. So it is almost 100% nurtured. I mean, we could argue percentages, but any of us can learn that perseverance, that efficiency, and it starts with values and identity. So for example, so many people are concerned, whether they know it or not, about reputation versus identity. And that sounds simple, like stop caring about what other people think. Just worry about what I think. Worry about who I am. Okay, who are you? Um, like when you asked me at the very beginning, at the top of our
Who are you? What do you
podcast
do?
here, and I just went to, well, I'm from Northern California, but everything else was about my career. Now, that's not who I am, but that's sort of how I answer. So, one of our exercises is, how do you, who are you? What is your identity? And we talk about creating a value credo. What is it that you actually stand for? What is it you actually care about? And, we have this great story. We got to interview Nathan Chen, who was the men's Olympic gold medalist in the 2022 Winter Games in figure skating in Beijing. And Nathan had been the prohibitive favorite to win the gold medal in 2018 in, I believe it was in South Korea. And he lost. He lost because he messed up in the short set, and he ended up coming in 5th overall. He was a fantastic skater. He's the best skater, but he was so caught up in, what other people think about him. And so really interesting, we literally went over, he was texting Eric before the finals in the 22 games. He was texting him, and one of his texts is, hey, people are coming in. I'm worried about what they're going to think about me. Like, oh my God, you're the world champion and you're still focused on reputation. And so Eric is, remember your credo, Nathan. What are you here for? And for Nathan, it was very simple. He likes figure skating. It's fun. And, so this simple transition of not what do they care about, but what do I care about? It's a very hard thing to do, but this is how, we lead the book. And it's a simple thing. It sounds, well, I mean, it's a simple thing, but it's a hard thing because it sounds like, oh yeah, okay, I'm just not going to worry about my reputation. Well, that's hard to not worry about. But then what do you focus on? What is your identity? So there's a whole process that we describe about bringing that identity out.
But the other side of that is you are working within a system, and each system has its own gaming rules to it. that if I were to meet someone like him at a cocktail party and I said, "So who are you and what do you do?" And he would say something like, "I like figure skating," or "I'm good at like it would be a weird thing. What I'm getting to is this idea that we live in such a different world where we really are our vocation in a strange way. And so the credo must be something really challenging because it's forcing us to do something that is very anachromatic to how we interact with one another.
Well, exactly. Well, exactly. And yet it's such an important way to anchor yourself in what you do, why you do what you do. It's not something to share at a party. It's not
Right.
good
Yeah. Yeah.
party
It's not
talk.
your title. Yeah.
Well, I'm all about integrity and adventure and curiosity. Like, okay, I don't want to talk to this person anymore.
Right.
But, maybe there's something in between that and, well, here's my current job that I do, 8 to 6 every.
So you and Eric are thinking about this book. What leads you down this path to recognize that there is a system, something that is teachable that would take somebody from here to there? What was the striking moment, the cracking of the spine of the book?
Eric came and gave a talk at Google. I believe this was about 2.5 years ago during COVID, a virtual talk. And he talked about some of the principles in the book, and I was just fascinated by it. So I connected with him afterwards, and I said, "Boy, would you be interested in writing a book about this?" And he said, "Yeah." And I went and I flew down to San Diego from, I live here in Northern California, and we spent the day together. And I guess what really fascinated me is kind of the humanity of the people that he's working with. Because we put whether it's a Navy SEAL or a CEO or a gold medalist kind of up on this pedestal. And yet what fascinated me is like a person like Nathan Chen, the very best in the world, the very, very, very best in the world is still having these self-doubts. They're people. And to talk to someone who has talked to hundreds and thousands of these people, uh, just kind of made me realize like, oh yeah, they're just people like the rest of us. I mean, it really is true. Um, we had another story. Eric told me, I love this story. It's so fun. One of the people he was working with had, he was an athlete and done a performance and goes into a Starbucks the next day and the barista goes, "Hey, I saw you on TV last night. Can I give you some tips?" Like, and our performer, Eric's client was like, "Yeah, let me have him." And then he runs in and talks to his coaches. Maybe I should do this. Like, you know, that's a person who's a superstar who's still like, human and feeling maybe I could learn something, like it's such a human story. So I guess that's what struck me is that, and then there's just, we really tried to make this very actionable, and cohesive. Like we think, look, this is not a big fat book with dense type. This is something you can read and take notes and get to act on it right away. And just, I just think I tell my kids all the time, it feels good to perform well. It feels good to work at it and get better at it. So that's what I hope. Um, some people will.
So you dig into this work with Eric, which inevitably leads to the book Learned Excellence. What did you change after working with Eric? Or was there a learning that you thought, I need to apply this to my life? I'm not doing this.
Well, one, Eric has a very regimented approach to time management.
Military
Describe it.
background? Go on.
Yeah. So, it's this concept of once a week, every Sunday, he looks about 10 days forward in his calendar and looks at his time and just make sure it's all accounted for. Look, if you want to have a couple hours of goof off time with your spouse or friend or whatever, just put it in there. It's fine. So one was just really be intentional about, about time management. That's one thing. And, the other thing, look, I was at Google for 16 years and then I left Google in January. So for 16 years, my identity was I'm a Googler. And boy, I was quite proud of that. Anybody at Google will tell you the same thing. We are so damn proud of what we do and what the company does in the world. And then suddenly I wasn't. And that was a kind of an identity versus reputation moment. And I had to think about, okay, I'm not a Googler. I am these things that I enjoy doing. So I enjoy writing. I enjoy working with interesting people. And so that was kind of a reframing for me, and just a reminder that it's a lot about identity. I mean, it's all about identity, and to work on for that, and not to work for the external, circumstance of like your title or your salary or what have you.
Tied into that, I'll tell you a story about an ex-Googler, not mentioning the names, but there was an individual, and I have so many friends who work there and have had great relationships with Google over the years. And they were leaving Google to pursue another opportunity and went there and didn't have a high level of success. And we were having a conversation about this after. And the provocation really was that often people were answering their call because of where they worked, not who they were. And
Mhm.
that by no longer being there, they truly realized who one would speak to them because of who the person was. And also, they believed that their skill level had to improve a whole lot more because they didn't have that brand backing them.
Yeah.
There's something interesting in that, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that does come back to the identity point as well.
Yeah.
It's easy if you work for a big brand like Google, people will return your call and respect you. And now it's like, so for example, that I don't. I really do feel like, okay, I gotta earn it a little more on my own. Um, which gets back to my own practicing of excellence. I'm talking to clients now. I'm on podcasts like yours. And yeah, I mean, I've sort of given you a word salad here, but I agree. It forces you to focus on your individual value, your value add, and that actually is usually pretty much the same thing as what you love to do, because we love to do things we're good at, and vice versa.
With surprising similarities between the way Google was operating at the level you were at and the rooms you were sitting in versus the outcome of what you and Eric created with Learned Excellence. Was there a lot of similarities? Was it surprisingly different?
Well, the perspective I brought to working with Eric and writing this book was, and sort of my takeaway from it, the book is primarily about individual excellence. How can individuals up their game? And we're not just talking about it in the workplace, by the way. There's multiple aspects
For sure.
of every person's life. There's work, there's relationships, hobbies, health, spirituality. You need to apply yourself in each of those areas to work on excellence. But I started to see real parallels between our mental disciplines, the five mental disciplines we espouse in the book for learning excellence as an individual, and the cultural excellence I experienced at Google and other companies where I've worked. There's really almost a straight line correlation. And so as a leader, we all want to create a culture of excellence in our workplaces. And I think that the values and the practices we put in the book for individual excellence are really pretty transferable to creating a culture of excellence. So yeah, I think that's was both kind of some of my experience that I brought into the book, but also a lot of my learning outside of it. I think these are practices leaders can apply to create a culture of excellence.
So you're able to analyze a different way, I'm guessing. You could look at someone like an Eric Schmidt and go, I see the connective tissue between that and what we were bringing out and Learned Excellence. You might be able to even look at other Googlers who were less successful and go, I can see which of these five traits perhaps there was somewhat of a lapse in that didn't enable this person to excel. I'm guessing that you kind of open up a bit of a Pandora's box in terms of your ability to analyze someone's performance in a different way now.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Yeah, I suppose, um, I go, when you say analyze someone's performance, I go immediately to tactical and performance reviews and one-on-ones. And I do think it would be an interesting leadership conversation to have with someone over time, or get to know them about the mental disciplines we talk about. So you sit down with someone who's on your team or a colleague. What are your values? Like let's get to know each other a little bit. What are your goals? And this is a key aspect. In Trillion Dollar Coach, we talk about how leadership, and there's really two components to leadership, actually three. I call this the Trillion Dollar Coach's the leadership formula. And the leadership formula is leadership as management plus coaching times love. And so, management is uh, delivering on whatever you're supposed to deliver on. Your team is supposed to sell this amount, produce this amount, ship by this date. You have goals and making sure your team hits those goals. Coaching is very different. Coaching is understanding the people on your team and what does success mean to them. So that's where the values and goals might come in, which is our first principle. Um, you know, um, what are your values? What do you care about? And what are your goals? And we all have we always do those career conversations. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 3 years? I never get anywhere with those conversations. But when I start to say, what do you want to learn? What do you want to get better at? Which kind of gets more to identity, then you get somewhere. So yeah, I think that um, we talk about mindset. You could certainly talk with people about what do you think is the mindset you want to have in this role? Okay, let's name one of those traits. Oh, I see. So you want to be, I don't know, more resilient, more creative. I don't know. Okay, how are we gonna? Let's talk about how we practice those traits. And I mean, that would be fascinating. That's just a conversation I've never had in a workplace environment. But yeah, I think you could go through each of these points and use them as a way to think about people on your team and the culture you're creating.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on my friendships there and my relationships there and the work I've done at a place like Google. And I don't know, I might argue back, Alan, that you were kind of spoiled, that you were in an environment that did that. You had people in there writing books like Search Within Yourself. You had leaders who wanted people, you had a culture of the 20% time of finding. Most organizations were looking to Google for that type of leadership excellence. So there's an interesting thing there too, where maybe you were marinating in it so long that this idea of learned excellence became a natural progression for you in a world where I think so many people are probably in businesses where they don't even have 5 years of having the fortune of that type of culture too.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. Anybody at Google is incredibly spoiled in a good way,
Yeah.
because there still is a culture of excellence in the company. It's very different than when I joined 17 years ago. Um, but yeah, it is still a culture of excellence. So I feel like my three books are sort of a trilogy about achieving excellence. The first book, How Google Works, was really about more of the management principles. The second book was about the leadership and coaching principles. And now Learned Excellence, even though it's not about Google at all, really does have a lot of application and comes a lot from my observation of seeing a workplace culture of excellence. Um, but there's many, many, many excellent workplaces.
Oh, for
So
sure.
it's certainly not unique to Google. No.
Let's talk a little bit about your mindset, because here you are in both cases working with two Erics, in one case also dealing with a coach who was renowned for people wanting access to this individual and understanding how they think. Here you are going on a journey. It's not going to be a 1 week journey. You're writing a book, there's research, there's back and forth, there's collaboration. What do you what do you think you brought to the table, or what did you hope to bring to the table? And how did that work out for you?
You mean it to the table in terms of book writing specifically?
Being the author with these extremely high performing individuals that have vision, that
Mhm.
have succeeded and excelled. This isn't a situation where you and I might talk about what kind of book would we write. There were principles and efficacies and results in place that you're trying to squeeze out. You've got the orange, you're trying to get the juice out of it here.
Yeah. Well, look, the art of communications, or particularly executive communications, um, executives or any really accomplished, smart, or interesting people have things they know that the world does not. There's sort of an information asymmetry, right? Uh, Everybody's got stuff they know that's super interesting. Um, a lot of people are not very good at communicating it to the world. So I think I have a skill set in creating the bridge in that information asymmetry. So the process with Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg and I for the first set of books was we'd get together every 2 to 3 weeks and say, okay, today we're going to talk about this topic about Google. And then we just start talking. And I sort of go into interview mode. What do you remember about this? What was your mindset there? And then, listen for the interesting things that they say. the things that are, not just a good turn of the phrase, but really capture it, the nuggets, I like to call them. So that's part of what I bring is, I think, a skill set of talking to people and hearing them and interviewing them and distilling it into a good story and narrative. Because a lot of times people don't know the most interesting stuff that they say. They think it's something else. And, traditional communications, marketing and PR communications is about shaping a message. And I try to listen to what people actually say when they're just talking. So, just like you mentioned in your conversation here, you want to just have a conversation because that's when people say interesting things. So, I mean, that's kind of part of what I brought is that skill set. And then, like I said earlier, I think a perspective over the arc of these books about, leadership and excellence. These have built upon each other. I really do think leadership is management plus coaching times love. And, with the Learn Excellence book, I would probably add to that there's individual principles of excellence that leaders can espouse and exemplify, which will help build a culture of excellence to their teams.
So I want to talk in particular about leadership and excellence in today's world and get some thoughts from you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the reality of we sit here as we record this in what might be something greater than what they're already calling a polycrisis. We're seeing a world of work and business that we probably haven't seen in my generation for sure. And a lot of the conversations that I'm having with leaders is an uncertainty because the macro factors are so well beyond their control. Whether you're looking at things as simplistic, even though they're not in business, as growing interest rates, changing consumer behavior, things like wars that impact how the economy works. Prior to this, maybe we would have talked a little bit about supply chain. We would still talk about things like a climate crisis. Can you talk about how leaders can think differently or how they can get up in a world that seems to be very down? And I'm saying this also fully understanding that the economy feels a little strong, that consumers are spending, they're out there. It feels vibrant in a world that almost shouldn't, if you asked any leader.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to approach that. I think of, first of all, it's pretty easy to get anxious when you think about wars and climate change and politics and so on. You start to get anxious. And I think of one of the guys we interviewed for Learned Excellence was Mark Luttrell, who's an ex-Navy SEAL, and was in a horrible battle and lost all of his
Black Hawk
teammates in the
Down,
battle.
for those Black Hawk Down.
No, it was Lone Survivor.
Lone Survivor. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So Marcus was the lone survivor. And he told us the story. It's just remarkable. He's being chased in Afghanistan by dozens of enemies with guns who killed most of his teammates. And he was injured, and he just, in the moment, like hiding, stopped, breathed, deep breathing, which is one of the things they practice, and repeated his mantra to himself. And I don't know word for word, but he had a mantra that he would use to get himself up, and it sort of calms him and centers him. So, there's with all of the anxiety that this world can create, I do think that sometimes it's good to breathe. And then, practicing mindset is all about controlling the controllables and ignoring the stuff you can't control. I think it's we have a quote in the book from one of the world's great philosophers, Linus from Peanuts. And it goes something like, inner peace comes from ignoring what you can't control. I'm botching that. That's not the exact, but you get the point. So, in all performances, let's think about what you can control. And your control is your attitude, your effort, and your behavior. Your attitude is how you think about something. How do you approach it? Are you positive? Are you optimistic? Are you thoughtful? Are you compassionate? Your effort is how much work are you going to put in? And your behavior is what do you actually do? That's all we can control. So, if you're a leader, great. Maybe take some time thinking about all these extraneous factors. Certainly be aware of them. But then what can you do? What should your attitude be? What can your team do? And then the other thing that comes to mind as you were asking your question, Mitch, is as a leader, your team is going through all this anxiety too. Everybody's feeling it. And so this is where coaching can come in. Take a minute to listen to people. How are you feeling? Is what happened last night in the news, is that rattling you? Are you okay? Just checking in, see how you're doing. 5 minutes. I think that, creates more trust and camaraderie in a team, just a little action, little notion like that. I don't spend half your one-on-one talking about last night's game, but I do think this is one thing I learned at Google, when things happen in the external world that are really profound, sometimes you got to give your team space to talk about it. And sometimes it's more important to think about that and talk about that than whatever the matters are at that day on hand.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing too, because when we talk about return to office, there's a lot of talk about that. I don't know if we're ever going to get beyond this 3-day in the office. It feels like that seems to be the wall that most organizations have hit as they traipse into 4. By the time this gets published, who knows where we'll be. But some of the powerful sentiments around this is not just come to the office because there's the office, but giving employees the experience, give them the reason beyond the work. And one of the main things you'll hear in a lot of the rhetoric around this is the greatest leaders are really the greatest coaches. Who wouldn't want to show up for an incredible coach? Who wouldn't want to spend the day in the office if that person is inspiring and motivating and helping you understand things like overcoming your adversity or how to find your balance or even walking you through a new process? And that perhaps we can agree on that. Maybe you won't agree, Alan. I'm hoping you will. But if you do, and I think I do, it also makes for a curious moment in time where it means 50% of the time, in theory, that you're doing your work, you're not being exposed to that. So why wouldn't you want to have 6 days a week of that personal type of training? I'm dancing around this idea, but I'm curious if you feel that in this changed world of work, how does leadership change? And is it simply about being that great coach? And what do we do in a world where we probably have a lot of managers that aren't really good at this stuff?
Well, I'm a communications expert. So I think communications is part of that answer. In fact, when you think about you're a leader, especially if you're a leader of a large organization, the few things that you can control and change right away, one of them is your communications. Another might be hiring practices, who you bring onto the team. But communications is certainly something you can control. So I'm a big believer of people working in the office. I think that you lose so much of that camaraderie and that energy working individually at home, and yet I get like the lack of productivity from commuting. Productivity can be much higher at home, but think about any job where you want to be excellent. Again, think about being excellent. Is being productive the same as being excellent? No, no, it's not. You know, right? Productive is doing your job, what you're supposed to do, checking all the boxes. Maybe that's all you want to do. If you want to be excellent, you also want to be creative. You want to go into, as my old boss, Margot Georgiadis used to say, go into white spaces. Where is stuff not getting done that needs to be done? And usually a lot of that will come from, learning about that through conversation. So as a leader, I do think you need to bring people into the office. And it's, perks don't do it. Perks are nice. But I don't know. I haven't cracked the code on that, but have a reason for people to be in the office. Get people together. Make sure that spontaneous interaction happens. Because that's how serendipity happens. Serendipity does not happen when you're at home. Now, on the other hand, people are working from home. So as a leader, I think you need to be more outgoing and touching base with people. Set up those chats, ping people, and make sure you're not just pinging them where there's a crisis. Say, hey, you there? You want to chat? I just wanted to catch up for a few minutes. Over communicate in all the channels that you have, and be very thoughtful about that.
You know, I often tell people that the job that you have isn't just a culmination of you successfully performing the tasks that were on the job description. That there's the other side of that coin is there's a brand, a business, a culture, a vision that you're contributing to. And that it may not be a task that you're doing, but the sheer presence of how we all activate in that moment is powerful. The analogy I would talk about is live music. The band's performing, you paid and you sat there, but there's something that happens in between when they start playing between you and the audience that's very different. You can't just be in the audience and be a part of the show. You have to
Mhm.
be taking in that magic part in the middle. And I also don't know how to define it, but I feel like we often forget about what happens when you and me are there and working in symphony. There's something else there. There's a third presence, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Well, the live music, the band analogy is kind of a good one, because when you're on a team, you want everyone singing the same song, right? And so I think part of leadership is kind of communicating that song.
Yeah.
So what is our vision? What does great look like? Which should be inspiring. Greatest looks like when we've organized the world's information and made it universally accessible and useful. The value statement that Eric and Larry came up with. I'm sorry, Larry and Sergey came up with.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, what is your strategy and what is your plan? Like, one of the things that Eric Schmidt used to say, you can't have a strategy without a plan, or vice versa. You need both. And it's just like simply communicating that. So many companies now, like, I was working with this client, and I went around to 15 of the leaders and I said, how do you describe what your company does when you're, at dinner with an aunt, or a person who's not in the industry? And I got like 13 different answers. So I think one thing you can do, especially when people are, um, again, this is my perspective as a communications person, but when people are working from home, or more spread out, is just make sure you're kind of all singing from the same song sheet, like literally the same words. Here's what we stand for. Here's our vision. Here's what we do. Here's the unique insights we have about the market, things like that. And I don't mean like marketing PR value statements. I mean the real things your team cares about.
So let's talk a little bit about values. It's a word you've mentioned multiple times. It's core to learned excellence. I think it's core to the work you've done, not just professionally, but in the writing that you've done as well. Values are very different in a polarized world. How we express our values. I know a lot of brands are being called to the mat. Take a stance. Are you for Israel, or are you for, take a stance. Are you for LGBTQ plus rights or not? Take a stance. Where do you stand on Black Lives Matter? And it's not that businesses are finding themselves flat footed at all. I think that many of them are talking about that in relation to their values. I think the murkiness comes from the team members. When the debates start happening, you've seen businesses shut down things like Slack channels because it's getting too polarized. Can you talk a little bit about what values mean in such a polarized world where we can all agree that this is where the business is going, but my values are so fundamentally different from the person sitting next to me?
I guess I would differentiate between values and, say, political views, some of the stuff you might be talking about. Again, at an individual level, values are all about, why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? If I'm in the Navy SEALs, why am I doing that? I probably have the values of protecting family. I probably have the values of protecting country. Like, my value is protection. Yeah, that's something I value: safety for for people I care about, and the
Patriotism, maybe. Yeah.
yeah, right. Um, so I'm not doing what I do, maybe to get a medal or something. I'm doing because this is what I care about. Our values at Google when I started was pretty much kind of boiled down to one: well, two, focus on the user and don't be evil. And I mean, that's what people really cared about. We don't want to be evil. We want to do the right thing by our users. Now, there was a corporate value statement and they published stuff, and that was all well and good. But the authentic values were the things that the company really cared about. So, when companies are, when you're talking about, say, political statements, maybe a company, I don't know, that's sort of a different sort of communications challenge. But let's say, does a company really, really care about, let's say, creating a word we use a lot at Google, psychological safety? The message, the communications message is bring your whole self to work or whatever, crap they put on a website. What do people really care about? Well, I mean, you can tell. When someone has a dissenting point of view, are they respected? Do they, even if they look different, they're from a different place. Are they sought out? Are they ignored? So, I mean, I say the values are true. It's not just what you say, it's how you actually behave. And, in the book, again, we talk and Learn Excellence a lot about the individual values. Why am I here? What do I care about? I don't care what other people are thinking. I care about being good at this. I care about standing up my, things I care about. And at a leadership level, I think, I think it's important to share that. Here's what I care about as a leader. I care about all of your success and really mean it. Or, maybe I just care about this company and the company being, I don't know, but values are what you care about. And then, then that leads to different opinions. But look, I don't have to, I'm working next to you. We're working together on some. I don't care if I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican and I'm pro-Israel and I don't, because a lot of our values are the same.
So how do you react in a world where people take the value and maybe the world doesn't feel that way anymore? You use the phrase "don't be evil," and that was something that's definitely got blown back up into Google's face over the years. We don't have to speak in particular about Google if we don't want to, but we could look at things big companies like Walmart and others have said that ultimately have come back to be move fast and break things was another great line that we might have some regret or different thinking about as the company grows and has success and is part of the fabric of the things that we do. Can you talk about what to do in a world where you're pursuing that, but ultimately the world now sees it in a different light?
Well, look, at Google, "Don't be evil" is um, a bad as a marketing message, as a PR message, because of course, everyone's going to turn that against you because you can't help but be
When you
perceived as
become
being evil.
massive and huge,
Right.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, so of course it was a bad marketing message that's going to bite you at some point. Doesn't mean it's a bad value. In fact, I hope the company still aspires in everything it does to not be evil. And that ought to be a question everyone asks still, even if it's no longer the marketing tagline. So, um, because it's still at the core of what the company is. So,
It just
um,
things seem plausible when you're young, nimble, and new, and they often change dramatically as something fits into the world. And especially when it does at scale, like some of these big tech companies. It's hard not to look at them and think, are they still that? Or are they that and that's not good because of their size and scale?
the question of what is being evil is becoming a lot more nuanced when you're
Yeah.
working, you're impacting across billions and billions of people. But otherwise, I think it's still a valid discussion to have.
Yeah.
And you, um, and you still need to try to be true to those values. And, I mean, Google or companies like Apple are unique because they do have billions and billions of people that they affect, most of the people on the planet. But most leaders are not dealing with that level of scale. So again, I, I think I kind of disagree with your premise, which is that I think most core values hold up over the long run and don't abandon them. But, again, getting back to the individual and your identity, your value credo, um, be thoughtful about it and make sure it's authentic and it will serve you well through the course of your leadership life, your performance life.
So we have a bit of a different world with individuals. You mentioned earlier that people aren't focused on those individual medals, I might make the argument that we live in a world where people are really focused on those individual medals. Profession of being an influencer, the profession of being even a professional speaker always makes me laugh. I do this professionally, but I do this as a result of the work that I do, not as the vocation. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what it means to manage people in a world where individuals very much see themselves as, I'm here for a short time to work, almost as if, even though it is an FTE position, as a contract, I got to get this project done. We work in projects. We have this thinking in the world. Even as remote work took hold, you saw more and more people who were essentially out for themselves.
Yeah, one
This
of
is a
the
culture that's going to be hard to cultivate the next great leaders on.
one of the core principles of excellence is process, not outcome. If you just focus on outcome, um, one, you're probably not going to get the outcome you want. But if you focus on the process and how you approach your work, again, your attitude, your effort, your behavior, what is your feedback loop? How do you institute change? You will get much, much better and derive and deliver much better outcomes. So, we see it all the time. Someone is chasing an outcome and, I don't know, let's say you're chasing a promotion and then, uh, someone else gets it or they decide not to do any promotion, and you're deflated and you're defeated and you lost, right? You did not succeed. Well, that's kind of the wrong attitude. If you did everything right, if you followed your process, if you worked hard, if you learned, if you checked all the boxes and the things you wanted to do, the outcome will take care of itself. Maybe you didn't get that promotion, you'll get the next. And so our constant mantra is process, not outcome. And and what I mean by that is not just like, I don't know, you follow this process at work or with some whatever boring thing. But process is one, make the most use out of your time. I'm talking about now about individual excellence and individual outcomes. Be really good about time management. I mentioned that earlier. Two, have a valid and vetted network of feedback. This was something I was terrible at earlier in my career. I'm probably not even good at it now. Who, who do you trust? Who do you listen to for your performance? I'll listen to my wife because she's going to tell me no matter what. But, most people, you're like, I don't need to hear from that person. No, be intentional about setup. Here are some people that are vetted. I know that they care about my success. I know they have expertise and experience in this particular area, and they're valid. They're giving me feedback based on real evidence. And then tell those people, by the way, I'm counting on you. I need your feedback. And that's a process thing, not an outcome thing. How are you ever going to learn and get better if you don't have that feedback process in place? And then, then you got to think about, okay, they've given me some feedback. Do I blow everything up and start over? No, I probably just work on that one thing. So, I think that, we are in an outcome focused world that hasn't changed that much, but the best performers, the top people, they have a goal in mind. I'm not saying ignore the outcome, but they know the way to get there is by doing their process and controlling what they can control.
Yeah, it was a question I was curious about. It's this idea of, because process was a big word for me that came out of learned excellence. And I was thinking a lot about the fact that you would think that a process is very unique to an organization and a leadership style, but ultimately there are some amazingly universal themes. And I think the feedback one you just gave is an excellent example of that. It could be applied at any level to any organization. You could even be an entrepreneur in a business of one and look to somebody younger who's got some interesting insights, or somebody who's been successful as a way to bring that in. So that gets me really excited and
Yeah.
fired up. I'm wondering, were there other very obvious universal truths to process that surprised you?
Well, I just had this great story that surprised me that I thought of. We interviewed Carly Lloyd, who's one of people Eric has worked with. Carly Lloyd is perhaps one of the greatest female soccer, or football, if you're not American, players of all time. It's a couple of World Cups, a couple of gold medals, FIFA Player of the Year a couple of times. She told us the story about how she was in I think it might have been a World Cup semifinals, and she missed a penalty kick. And they lost the match in part because she missed the kick. And so, like, even someone who's competing in a World Cup, she talks about the penalty kick. She got a little rattled. Like, she was walking up to the ball, not sure which way she was going to go. She going to go left or right, like thinking about it and overthinking it. And, so that's, you can't be thinking at that point, right? Your process has to be, I am not thinking, it's got to be automatic. So, so she went back and she thought about, attitude, effort, behavior, and really reinvented her process for taking PKs. And in the next World Cup 2015, they won, and she made a couple penalty kicks. So it applies at all levels. By not worrying about making the penalty kick, but just focusing on exactly how she approaches it and keeping the mind square, she was able to be successful. So I think that's the main thing. Was just, and then there's, there's the things you can't control. We talked to a guy named Mike Dowdy. Mike is a wakeboarding champion, one of Eric's clients. And he got to wakeboarding is where, you're riding behind a boat and you're jumping off waves and stuff. And you're going like 50 miles per hour. If you fall, it's bad. And, they got to an event, I think it was in Vienna. And, they always practice on this glassy water. And this event was on a canal or a lagoon or something. And it was really windy and stormy. But, he looks at that. He goes, well, there's nothing I can do about that. So what's my process? What am I going to do? Not changing it. And he won the world championship. So I mean, these are I guess these just reinforce that it's, work on the process, the outcome will take care of itself.
Alan, tell me one thing that really made you think differently.
I first joined Google and I was Eric Schmidt's speechwriter. That was my job. And I had never actually been a speechwriter. I had a career in sales and product management, and I was an excellent communicator. And sales is really a form of executive communications, right? Because your idea is to get as high in the organization as possible and get them to care about you and care about your message and trust you. That's what communications is about. So I was not completely unprepared for the role, but somewhat, Google had, kind of a practice by then of taking people who are just smart and good learners and dropping them in roles and letting them figure it out. So here I am trying to figure it out. And my first talk with Eric, I'm in a room with a couple other people and we're preparing a speech for NASA. And one of the other people in the room was an astronaut, an ex-astronaut who now worked at Google. And the other person was Vince Cerf, who was one of the founders of the internet. And I'm just like starstruck. I'm just this guy. And then Eric Schmidt walks in. And Eric just sits in and goes, okay, guys, what's the most interesting thing I can say?
Great question.
Every communication exercise, I start with that because think about it. Most communications exercises in the business world are about what am I going to say? I need to sell them on this product. I need to sell them on this policy. It's about what I'm interested in. But compelling communications is about what you're interested in. It's not about what I care about. It's what is Mitch interested in today? What's on his mind? Maybe I can teach him something. Everyone likes to learn things. Maybe I can entertain him. Everyone likes to laugh or hear a good story. It's not about, hey, my product has these 3 features. That's not what Mitch is interested in. So I think that's actually a more in-depth question than it first appears. And so I think about that all the time.
It's great. You've written 3 incredible books, Trillion Dollar Coach, How Google Works, and your latest, Learned Excellence. Alan, let people know where they can find out more about the books you're writing, the stuff you're sharing online.
LearnedExcellence.com is the website for Learned Excellence, the book. My LinkedIn profile is simple. It's Alan Eagle. Feel free to connect. And yeah, I have a website also, alaneagle.com.
That's great. Alan, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. It's been awesome to talk to you.